Welcome back to Indian Trace. Just a little hoarse, don't mind my voice. An idea that I've been throwing around for a while uh, sort of got crystallized today. So I'm going to take the first couple steps. And it's been cold. It's the cold season, I guess. I'm talking temperature. I mean, people get sick and colds anytime throughout the year for whatever excuse, whatever reason they have, and I don't get sick that often. Just a little hoarse, a little stuffiness, but it's long gone now for the bigger part. These two groups mean something. I mean, these 10 points come from one particular bin, but I'm going to do a stories series, and I want you to consider one for yourself, whether you grab a handful of points here or there, or I'm doing a stories series. From the top, and some of the new people here, the top of my tackle box, my display box. Now, it's just the top because I call it my top shelf stuff. And I don't want to get into it too much. But if you pause it, you'll see if you zoom in, every one of these is what I consider in my heart and my estimation top shelf stuff. My next stories series, I know I have an idea where it's coming from, but as you can see, this happens to be empty. And so that's the compartment I took out. I mean, look at the variation in that Rhyolite. So these have been featured, but I figured to myself when I looked at them, I said, listen, I don't even see these that often, not at all. And if I don't, sure as you live, people out there that are new, tuning into Indian Trace or checking out the artifacts, they sure have not seen some of these, maybe at all or often at all. But with every one of the points we find, whatever one of the artifacts we save, and I'll start with this group. These 10 fit perfectly into that bin, and there's room for another one or two. But for every one of these we find, the interesting thought that I had behind it, and the reality is there's a story behind it. Not just the story of the man that fashioned it was using this, or possibly woman. I can't tie that down as an absolute. But there is a story there. But then there's another story. For all these, and this is 7 here, and there's 3 over here to make 10. There's another particular story about these. For all these that we found, we have our own story of how they turned out. Very simple story, usually very quick. But we have our stories of when they came along and how they came along. And I'll share that with you. And if you have, grab a handful of points and share your stories. Just the simplicity of how it came along. You know, when it adds up, and you finally get a whole group or a whole frame of artifacts, you look at them, and because you collected them, you know the story behind them. For example, I know that this piece here, from Site 2, from Backside Cove, was a great piece of rhyolite. And I know that I found another Marl Mountain that's fairly big, right in the same place. Look like shields, don't they? But this thing was pressed in a wash. I mean, flat pressed in the dirt of a hard wash. So I mean, it was pressed in the solid clay, and it had, of course, it was on the track where 20,000-pound combines just rolled right over the top of this multiple times. But that day it was all washed off the top, so it was just cresting, just sitting up there like this, and it was pressed down in there, you know. So it was just like one with the dirt. But it was a different color. And so it didn't need to stay there any longer. As you can see, you'd imagine with me, you can see how they made it in every way. This, if you're just tuning in, is green, and it's rhyolite, and it was dark army green flint when they originally napped it. So that was a great story. And you know, when we have our top quality points that we consider our favorites for various reasons, you know, the interesting thing is, we have memories associated with them, stories that go with them. So for posterity's sake, if this is ever tuned in, somebody wants to study or research from my family side, some of these artifacts that they have in their hands, they'll be able to find out a story behind it if they do their digital research. A point that I've loved right here from the falcon. It was a season that, in that field, they don't, it's very sporadic depending on how they rotate crops. They definitely plow fields around here. They definitely need to with some of the crops, such as sweet potatoes and tobacco and the varying different crops they have. They can't split it all in there. Sometimes they can split cotton in, but now that's an old break right there. That's not a new nick, so they just went with it. But this is from the falcon, and I remember very distinctly that day I was finding quite a few great artifacts. And that place is very rich, but I haven't been able to collect it an abundant amount of times. It's been through hay recently. It's been split-seeded, and sometimes, as you guys know out there, you have to lay off. You need tremendous patience. You have to lay off an area for a half a year to a year. That might sound like a tremendously long time for some people. That was a great, almost Morrow Mountain. And they make Morrow Mountains there at the Falcon. There's a great Guilford, though. Look at this Guilford Yuma. Site 1, the easement. Discoloration was always interesting me on this point. So you see, these are not all perfectly pristine, excellent, super, without a flaw artifacts. They are clearly authentic for anybody who takes a look at them. And look at this Guilford Yuma. So it had to go with that bin. And I remember this site where this came from, and look at that picture, has not produced a whole lot. I know there's a lot there. I know something was going on there, but it's one of those places where you resign yourself to patience. That was not half as loud as it sounded. And sometimes you can't make it happen. You just have to wait. And wait. And sometimes, I suppose, it doesn't ever happen. I've had sites like that where it just never happens. It's a great point, though. Some of these points, as you can see, have old breaks on the tips and what have you. So I'm not pulling my just top perfection just to show it off, but I just wanted to share this stories series with you. For example, look at this. Beaver Point, one of the earliest points that I found maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I might have had 5 sites that I collected. 5 spots, areas, as opposed to maybe 80 now. But Beaver Point was one, and this thing on this side up had gone through already the stripping of at least half the tobacco crop out of the field with the machines and driven over. I'd almost had algae growing on it. It was pressed into the mud. Just forgotten. Nobody'd walked down. Nobody checked it out. So I'll never forget it. I mean, funny thing, we could go back to the exact spot that we found some of these on. So that was a great story there. Never forget that. And that site actually has produced quite a great many quality artifacts. North Guil. Unique relief on the back side of this. You can see the relief where they hafted this in with the material for this Guilford. It's interesting because it's fairly close to where this Guilford came from. Again, it's not perfect, but just in symmetry and the quality and care they took for making something that would gain their survival, their food. And again, it was when I was just discovering this field that I found this. And it's another field that just, it's an organic field, if you will. So they in some of these fields, they've stopped spraying certain chemicals as much. And so they naturally grow a greater amount of weeds. And so they're just really handling the fields in terms of agricultural differently. And that needs to be brought into account. I have a field called Hartfield right across the street from me. And I must have been able to understand artifacts just before they sold it to a real estate company who's been trying to sell it. It's on the edge of a floodplain, so it hasn't been bought. But it's a definite Indian site. A season or two before they were done, I must have pulled 30, 40 great artifacts off of there. I know it'll produce. This is a Guilford Yuma. And when I was finding pieces off there, it was such a young, misunderstood age in terms of what I knew about artifacts. I mean, I knew they were great artifacts, but, I didn't know it was a Guilford Yuma. I didn't, these names, and I still don't really study the names out to just hold myself to them. Like, I know in this area they make lots of Guilfords, different types, even Guilford straight base, which this is, in Rhyolite, from the Vulture, which is actually right next door to this guy, the Falcon. I mean, like right next to it. It's pretty, it could be one site, but they'd be too big. Great piece. Now this day, the day that I found this, things were falling off the edge of the cliff. I mean, I was finding some great pieces and I was totally overwhelmed. It was one of those days where I probably had found 30, 40 great artifacts. Maybe 10 really high quality pieces, and this being one of them. You can see the color of the original Rhyolite for those who are new here. It's that army green color. It was all that color before it patinaed. But they made this one very well. You can see why I just stayed in one of my favorites and my top quality stuff. So that's that group. And the stories behind it. I know that this was found when the sweet potatoes were maybe about 3-4 weeks old. Now these three here were found from midpoint. Midpoint's in site 4. They're found from one site and in the circle of about 20 yards. So they could be in some ways a cache. But I doubt it, because the way they're made, all three, although it's similar in style, it's definitely different in terms of the person who made them. Distinct flaking from a point like this. The last of the three that I did find, a little broken, but I can't cry too much. It's just really crazy what was going on, what goes on there at midpoint. I haven't fully discovered the point, the field. It hasn't been open. I haven't been here long enough collecting. It'll come open again. They'll plow it again, put crops in it. It's gone through some split seeding and some beans, and the bean season is just so long. But I mean, seriously, within a 20-yard radius circle, these were found. The first one I did find there was this guy. Asked a lot of questions online about it, got many. It's smooth through there. And I don't know what it all means, but a lot of you guys pay attention to grinding. All I know is it's an ancient Indian hunting point. Probably very early archaic. It's a great piece. The cool thing is about this set is their location. I could bring you to the spot. But what's interesting to me is that they have different, you can look at them there, they have different production styles. Even up to this one. It's made differently. They're all made differently. And they came from the same spot. So it could be different personalities. It could be different dispensations by 50 years. By 30 years, by 100 years. Look at this piece. Discoloration, it was made like this right there. Probably halved it in, changed that. So, that was pretty cool. When I go back there, of course, I keep my eyes open because, the story there is not done yet. Not done yet. There's more to be told. So I wanted to show you all those. Those are really fascinating to me. They go in one spot, sort of a story series, to give you the back work of how I located these and where they came from. As always, hope you find out there